The sky burned orange as the sun dipped low over the horizon, casting long shadows across the gravel road that cut through a sleepy, dust-covered town. A warm breeze carried the scent of hay and the faint promise of rain. Silence stretched across the empty streets, broken only by the occasional creak of a weathered sign or the distant whinny of a horse. Then, from the edge of town, came the soft sound of footsteps uneven and labored. She appeared like a ghost at first, limping into view with a suitcase that had seen better days and a baby clutched tightly to her chest. Her boots were scuffed, one nearly coming apart at the sole, and the hem of her dress dragged along the dirt. Her hair clung to her cheeks, matted with sweat and dust. The baby whimpered, his small hands curled into fists, his cries barely rising above the wind. She didn't look back. Her eyes searched the horizon ahead, but there was no destination, just fences, pastureland, and the open expanse of a ranch. Her ankle ached with every step, but she pressed forward, past boarded-up shops and the last flickers of life in town. The woman had learned to move even when her body screamed to stop. She had no map, no certainty, only the instinct to keep going, to protect the fragile life wrapped in her arms. The gravel crunched beneath her feet as she approached a long wooden fence, its posts worn and leaning, like they'd been standing watch over that land for 100 years. Behind it, open fields stretched wide and golden, dotted with grazing horses and a distant red barn. She rested her hand on the fence rail, fingers trembling, knuckles scraped and raw. Her suitcase dropped beside her with a dull thud. The baby stirred in her arms. She looked up at the sky as if asking it whether this was far enough. She didn't notice the man watching her from the porch of the house nearby. He'd been sipping coffee, though it had long gone cold, his gaze fixed on the horizon like he always did at dusk. He was tall, rough around the edges, with hands that had built fences and buried friends. He'd seen people come and go, but he hadn't seen someone like her in a long time, someone walking straight out of nowhere, carrying everything she had in two hands. He stood up slowly, setting his cup down. He didn't call out, didn't ask questions. He just walked down the steps, the old porch creaking beneath his boots, and crossed the short distance to the fence. The woman didn't flinch. She was too tired for fear, too numb for surprise. The baby peeked over her shoulder, his wide eyes locking onto a nearby horse grazing peacefully on the other side of the field. The cowboy looked at the baby, then at her. His voice, when he finally spoke, was low and calm. "Rest here," he said, tipping his hat gently. "If the baby likes horses." It wasn't a question. It wasn't pity. It was a lifeline. She blinked, unsure if she'd heard him right. No one had offered her rest in a long time. No one had seen her as more than a burden. But here he was, a stranger, offering her something she hadn't known in years: safety, a place to breathe. The baby let out a soft coo, his tiny fingers reaching toward the grazing horse. And for the first time in days, her shoulders loosened. Not completely, not yet, but just enough. She nodded slowly, tears forming in the corners of her eyes. "He does," she whispered. "He really does." The cowboy held the gate open, and she stepped through, carrying not just her baby but the quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, this was the place where the running could stop. The porch of the old ranch house creaked as the screen door swung open, and the cowboy stepped out into the golden light of early evening. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and worn in all the ways a man who's lived close to the land tends to be. A hat shaded his weathered face, and dust clung to his boots like a second skin. He stood still for a moment, taking in the view he'd seen every day for years, until his eyes landed on something new, or rather, someone. She was there at the edge of his fence, barely holding herself upright. A woman, not much more than a girl, with pain in her stance and a child in her arms. The baby wriggled, his tiny hand stretching toward the paddock where a mare grazed lazily under the fading sun. The woman didn't speak. Her eyes met the cowboy's with the kind of guarded fear you learn from too many nights alone and too many doors slammed in your face. The cowboy didn't ask who she was or why she was there. Life had taught him that sometimes the story didn't need to be told right away. He glanced at the child again, those small fingers waving toward the horse, his curiosity overpowering his hunger or weariness. The cowboy tipped his hat, then walked toward the gate, his boots crunching over the dry earth. He stopped a few feet away and looked at the baby before letting his eyes settle on the woman. "You can rest here," he said quietly, the corners of his mouth lifting into the faintest smile. If the baby likes horses. Asterisk, there was a pause, a long trembling moment in which nothing moved except the wind and the baby's tiny hand. The woman blinked, not quite believing what she'd heard. She looked down at her son, then back at the man. She didn't respond right away. She was used to offers that came with conditions, with leers, with hidden agendas. But this didn't feel like that. Asterisk, the cowboy didn't press. He just stepped back and swung the gate open, his hand brushing against the worn wood, as if inviting someone to step into more than just a yard but into safety, into stillness. Asterisk, the baby made a soft gurgling sound and kicked his legs. That simple, joyful noise seemed to unlock something in the woman. She gave the cowboy a slow, cautious nod and stepped forward, carrying more than just the child, carrying stories, burdens, and miles of silence. Asterisk, as she passed through the gate, her eyes flicked again toward the horse, who had wandered closer, curious and calm. The baby smiled. Asterisk, the cowboy noticed. He's got good taste, he said, pointing to the horse. That one's name's Clementine. Sweetest soul on 4 legs. Asterisk, the woman managed the smallest smile in return, the kind you don't even feel on your face after going without for so long. Asterisk, she followed the cowboy toward the porch, where 2 old rocking chairs waited under the slanting roof. He motioned to one, and she sat carefully, holding the baby close. He rocked beside her in silence, letting the moment settle without asking anything more. Asterisk, from that quiet porch, the world looked a little different, gentler, slower, possible. And though nothing had been promised, and everything was still uncertain, one thing was clear. Something had begun. Asterisk, something new. Something kind. Asterisk, the old ranch house creaked softly with the night wind, its wooden walls holding in the warmth of the fire that crackled in the stone hearth. Shadows danced across the room, flickering over worn furniture, faded photographs, and shelves lined with books no one had touched in years. It wasn't fancy, but it was safe, and that made it more than enough. Asterisk, she sat on the edge of the couch, her leg propped up on a footstool, carefully wrapping her swollen ankle with a roll of bandage the cowboy had pulled from an old first aid box. Her hands trembled slightly from fatigue, but she worked slowly, methodically. Her suitcase lay near the doorway, untouched since she came in. For now, she needed only what was in her arms. Asterisk, the baby had stopped crying. He lay peacefully, in a wool blanket on the couch beside her, watching the firelight with wide, curious eyes. Across the room, the cowboy stood at the stove, shaking a bottle gently over the heat, testing its warmth against his wrist the way he'd seen his sister do when her boys were small. Asterisk, neither of them spoke. Asterisk, the silence wasn't awkward, it was a kind of understanding, the kind that settles in when words are too fragile, too new. They didn't know much about each other. Names hadn't even been exchanged. But in that quiet, in the small, deliberate motions, the soft bottle warming, the careful bandaging, the way he had placed an extra quilt beside the couch without saying a word, something tender had begun to grow. Asterisk, she glanced over at him as he walked the bottle back toward her, holding it out with a nod. She took it and fed her baby, who latched on with a happy sigh. The cowboy sat nearby on a chair, pulled close but not too close, watching the fire as if it held all the answers he didn't know how to ask for. Asterisk, you have kids? She asked softly, surprising even herself. Asterisk, he shook his head. No, he said, after a pause, but I got 3 horses that act like toddlers, if that counts. Asterisk, she smiled faintly, her eyes never leaving her baby's face. It counts. Asterisk, the fire crackled, filling the space between them again. Asterisk, after a while, the baby drifted off, his tiny body relaxing completely for the first time in what felt like forever. She tucked him close and leaned back, exhaustion pulling at her bones. She hadn't slept indoors in days, maybe weeks, and yet she hesitated to close her eyes, unsure if she'd wake to find it all gone. Asterisk, as if sensing that, the cowboy spoke again quietly, steadily. Asterisk, you can sleep. Ain't nobody gonna move you along here. You're safe. Asterisk, her throat tightened. No one had said that to her in a long, long time. Asterisk, she nodded, just once, and lay back against the cushions. The firelight painted soft lines across her face. Now peaceful, now softer. The cowboy reached down and gently picked up her worn-out boot. The sole had nearly come loose. He studied it for a moment, then walked to the table, pulled out a leather kit, and began to mend it 1 stitch at a time. Asterisk, she watched him from half-lidded eyes, heart slowly thawing. Asterisk, it wasn't grand gestures or sweeping words that made her feel something again. It was this: a boot being mended, a bottle warmed, A chair placed just close enough. Asterisk to strangers, quietly becoming something like family. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The stars stretched wide across the night sky, unbroken and brilliant above the quiet ranch. Crickets chirped from the tall grass, and somewhere in the distance an owl called out into the open dark. The paddock was still bathed in silver moonlight, and the gentle sound of brushing broke the silence as the cowboy ran a curry comb down the flank of his mare. Clementine. Asterisk. The woman stood nearby, arms crossed against the chill, her bare toes digging into the cool earth. Her baby was asleep inside the house, wrapped up warm in a borrowed blanket, and for the first time in weeks, she had space to breathe. Asterisk. The cowboy didn't speak. He moved in rhythm with the brush, calm and quiet, like he understood that silence could hold more comfort than any words. She watched him for a long time before finally taking a slow breath, one that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her chest. Asterisk. He started locking the door after the baby came, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, said it was to keep us safe, but it felt like a cage. Asterisk. He didn't stop brushing, but his eyes shifted just enough to let her know he heard her. Asterisk. At first, I thought it was stress, sleepless nights, money problems, but then the yelling started, and the grabbing, always the same words, you've got nowhere to go, and I believed him for a long time. I really believed him. Asterisk. Her voice cracked. She looked up at the stars like they might carry her words away. Asterisk. One night, he threw a chair. It missed, but the baby screamed. That was it. I waited until he passed out, grabbed what I could, and ran. Didn't even have diapers, just that suitcase and a few dollars in my coat. Asterisk. The cowboy didn't interrupt. He kept brushing Clementine's coat, slow and steady, letting the rhythm fill the spaces her story left behind. Asterisk. I didn't know where I was going, just away, and every step hurt. My ankle went out on the second day, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. I was so afraid someone would turn us away, or worse, send us back. She wiped at her eyes with the sleeve of the shirt he'd given her. Then I saw your fence, and I almost kept walking, but the baby smiled when he saw the horses, and I thought, maybe this time would be different. Asterisk. The cowboy finally stopped brushing. He turned to face her, leaning on the fence post, his gaze gentle and strong. Asterisk. You've already walked farther than most ride in a lifetime, he said softly. Asterisk. Her lip trembled. No one had ever said that to her before, like she was strong, not broken, like surviving was something worth honoring, not something to be ashamed of. Asterisk. Thank you, she whispered. Asterisk. He nodded once, and for a moment neither of them spoke. The stars twinkled above them, silent witnesses to pain shared and slowly beginning to heal. Asterisk. She stepped closer to the horse, brushing her fingers gently along Clementine's muzzle. The mare leaned into the touch, calm and trusting. Asterisk. Maybe he was right, she said. Maybe I didn't have anywhere to go. Asterisk. The cowboy's voice was firm this time, but kind. That doesn't mean you don't have somewhere to stay. Asterisk. In that moment, something heavy lifted. Not completely. Not forever. But enough. Asterisk. Enough to believe, just for tonight, that there was a place in the world where she and her baby could start again. Asterisk. Morning broke gently over the ranch, painting the fields with soft gold. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of fresh hay and blooming wildflowers. Birds darted through the sky, and the sun glinted off the paddock fence where she stood, arms folded, her eyes fixed on a small, joyful scene unfolding before her. Asterisk. Her baby clean, rested, and fed sat atop a gentle pony named Sugar, his chubby hands gripping the saddle horn with wide-eyed excitement. He squealed with laughter as the cowboy walked alongside, leading the pony in slow, careful circles. The little one's giggles floated through the air like music, pure and full of wonder. Asterisk. She stood by the fence in a borrowed flannel shirt tucked neatly into a pair of clean jeans. Her new boots still stiff, still strange beneath her feet, fit better than she expected. They had been a gift from the cowboy, left on the porch that morning with a simple note. Everyone needs a pair that can carry them forward. Asterisk. Now, she leaned on the railing, one hand covering her mouth as her eyes filled with tears, not from fear, not from exhaustion or heartbreak, but from something she hadn't felt in far too long. Asterisk. Hope. Asterisk. She watched as her son bounced gently, with each step of the pony, his laughter tugging something loose inside her. She had dreamed of giving him moments like this, simple, joyful, ordinary, a world where he could laugh in the sun, surrounded by open sky instead of closed doors. Asterisk. The cowboy looked back at her with a quiet smile, tipping his hat in her direction. No words passed between them, but everything important had already been said between the silence. The shared meals, the mended boot, and the bottle warmed by the fire. When the ride came to an end, the cowboy lifted the baby down and handed him back to her, gentle and steady. The baby nuzzled into her shoulder, warm and safe. You to fit in just fine here, the cowboy said softly, almost like he was afraid to name it too soon. If you want to stay a while. She looked down at her son, then around at the wide sky and the land that had wrapped around them like a second chance. She hadn't had time to think beyond the next hour, the next safe stop, but maybe now she could. Her lips curled into a full smile. The first in days, maybe weeks, that came freely. I think we'd like that, she said. And there it was. Not a grand ending. Not a dramatic rescue, just a beginning. A quiet morning, a laughing child, a mother with dry eyes and new boots, and a man who understood that kindness didn't need conditions. Just open gates. And the courage to walk through them.